The human farmer saved a dying beast. The galaxy called him Monster Tamer. The golden hour on Tartarus IV did not look like a battlefield. The twin suns, no, the single, bloated red giant of the system, cast a long, bruised light across the horizon, turning the miles of genetically modified wheat into a sea of swaying bronze. The wind smelled of dry earth and heating engine coolant, a stark contrast to the sterile, recycled air Commander Kavra had breathed for the last 3 cycles. Kavra crouched in the depression of a ridgeline, her kinetic enforcer armor humming with a subsonic frequency that vibrated against her violet skin. She checked the charge on her plasma carbine for the 3rd time. Her amber eyes, devoid of pupils, scanned the valley below, filtering through thermal, infrared, and motion-tracking spectrums. Target location confirmed, she whispered into her comms, though the silence of the planet felt heavy enough to smother the transmission. Apex-class biological threat detected. Designation, World Eater. Status, stationary. Proceed with extreme caution, Commander, the voice of Admiral Vorak crackled in her earpiece. If the creature wakes, evacuate immediately. Orbital bombardment is on standby. Kavra suppressed a shiver. A World Eater. The Vraxian Dominion had lost 3 entire colonies to these creatures. They were chitinous nightmares that consumed biomass until planetary crusts cracked. This one had survived a crash landing from a smuggler's vessel 3 weeks ago. It should have been starving. It should have been rampaging. She crested the ridge, her boots sinking silently into the loam, weapon raised. She froze. The beast was there. It was a mountain of muscle and dark gray hide textured like ancient volcanic rock. It lay on its side in a crushed clearing of wheat, massive enough that its dorsal ridges rose higher than the nearby tractor. Bioluminescent stripes, a neon, toxic green, pulsed slowly along its flank and shoulder, rhythmic and hypnotic. But it wasn't eating. It wasn't screaming. A human was kneeling in front of it. Kavra's targeting reticle locked onto the figure. He was a male, dwarfed by the creature's snout alone. He wore a wide-brimmed, weathered beige hat that shaded his face, and a sleeveless, dark olive-drab tank top that clung to a torso damp with sweat. His arms were thick, the skin bronzed by the sun and mapped with the cords of functional muscle that only developed under heavy gravity. He wasn't armed. He held no shock prod, no neural whip, no psionic dampener. He held a rag. Kavra watched, her breath catching in her throat as the human reached out with a massive, calloused hand. He didn't strike. He grabbed the World Eater's lower mandible, a jawbone capable of shearing through starship hulls, and pried it open. He's dead, Kavra thought, her finger tightening on the trigger. It will snap him in half. The beast let out a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through the ground and up Kavra's legs. It wasn't a growl. It was a groan. Yeah, I know, big guy. The human's voice drifted up the hill, a deep, rough baritone that sounded like gravel grinding together. Hold still. You got a piece of scrap stuck in the gum line, probably from that satellite you chewed on Tuesday. The human leaned into the mouth. He placed his other hand on the creature's nose, right between the terrifying slitted nostrils. He torqued his body, the muscles in his back bunching under the thin fabric of his shirt, and yanked something free. The beast let out a sharp huff of air, blowing the human's hat back slightly. Got it, the human said, tossing a twisted piece of titanium alloy over his shoulder. He wiped his hand on his cargo pants. Good boy, Baxter, good boy. He patted the creature's snout. A heavy, rhythmic thump-thump-thump began to beat against the earth. Kavra adjusted her optics. The World Eater was wagging its tail. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Kavra's discipline. The Dominion had theorized about psionic domination for centuries, the ability to mentally enslave a sentient species. It was a myth, a god-tier power forbidden by galactic law. If this human, this dirt farmer, could enslave an apex predator with a touch, what could he do to a Vraxian? She stood up, her armor's servos whining loudly in the quiet field. The human turned. Under the brim of his hat, she saw a short, dark beard and eyes that squinted against the dying light. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't run. He just looked at her, then back at the monster, then back at her. Kavra leveled her carbine at his chest. Step away from the entity, she barked. her voice amplified by her helmet speakers. I am Commander Kavra of the Vraxian Dominion. You are in violation of Galactic Quarantine Protocol 7. Submit or be neutralized. The human slowly rose to his full height. He was tall, perhaps 6'4", towering over her own 6-foot frame. He wiped grease from his hands onto a rag tucked in his belt. Hey now, he said, his voice dropping to a hush. He raised a finger to his lips. Keep it down, darlin'. Baxter's got a migraine. Loud noises make him cranky. The beast, Baxter, lifted its head, its neon green spots flaring brighter. It let out a hiss that sounded like a steam valve rupturing. Easy, the human murmured, placing a hand on the creature's neck. The spots dimmed instantly. He looked back at Kavra, his expression unbothered, almost bored. You here to help with the harvest? Or are you just going to point that flashlight at me all evening? Kavra did not lower her weapon. She couldn't. Her instincts were screaming that she was in the presence of an apex predator, but her sensors couldn't decide which one it was, the 10-ton reptile or the man in the dirty tank top. I am not here for agriculture, Kavra hissed, stepping down the slope. Her boots crunched on the dry stalks. I am here to terminate the threat. Threat's currently napping, the human said. He turned his back on her, exposed his spine to an armed elite enforcer, and bent down to pick up a metal bucket. Come on up to the house. We can talk about killing my dog after I get some water in him. He started walking toward a modest, prefabricated farmhouse that sat on the edge of the field. The structure was scarred by weather, the paint peeling, surrounded by machinery that looked as if it had been salvaged from 3 different centuries. Kavra hesitated. The logical move was to fire. Vaporize the beast, stun the human, call for extraction. But the human's gait was steady, heavy, and undeniably arrogant. He walked with the casual confidence of a creature that had no natural predators. It unnerved her. It fascinated her. She followed him, keeping 5 meters of distance. Baxter, the World Eater, heaved himself up with a groan of shifting tectonic plates and lumbered after the human, his massive legs creating small tremors with each step. They reached the porch. The human set the bucket down, and the beast immediately buried its snout in the water, lapping noisily. The human walked up the wooden steps, his heavy boots thudding against the planks. Name's Dennis, he said, not looking back. He opened a screen door that creaked in protest. You want some iced tea? It's hot out there in that tin can suit. Kavra remained at the bottom of the steps, scanning the perimeter. I do not require hydration. I require your surrender codes. How are you controlling the beast? Is it a neural implant? A pheromone dampener? Dennis reappeared a moment later with 2 condensation-slicked glasses. He leaned against the porch railing, the wood groaning under his weight. He took a long drink, his throat working as he swallowed. Kavra found her eyes tracking the movement of his Adam's apple, the sweat glistening in the thick hair of his chest where the tank top dipped low. No codes, Dennis said, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. Just patience. And a lot of beef jerky. Found him 3 weeks back, half-starved and stuck in a ravin. Pulled a shard of hull plating out of his side the size of a door. He extended a glass toward her. Drink. You look tense. Your spikes are glowing. Kavra looked down. The bioluminescent markings on her armor, and the natural ones on her violet skin beneath, were flaring a warning gold. She was reacting to his pheromones. Not the beast's, his. He smelled of earth, machine oil, and something sharp and musky that bypassed her logic centers and hit her hindbrain. She holstered her weapon, a calculated risk, and walked up the steps. She took the glass. Her gloved fingers brushed his. His hand was hot, rough like sandpaper, and engulfed hers completely. The heat shock traveled up her arm. It is unwise to touch a Vraxian, she said, her voice tighter than she intended. My skin secretes a mild paralytic when I am threatened. Dennis didn't pull away. He smiled, and the skin around his eyes crinkled. It transformed his face from dangerous to devastatingly boyish. I've handled electric eels and threshing machines, darlin'. I think I can handle a little tingle. He let go, and the absence of his heat was immediately disappointing. Kavra scanned the liquid in the glass. Water, sucrose, citric acid, no toxins. She took a sip, It was shockingly cold and sweet. "So," Dennis said, crossing his massive arms over his chest. The biceps bulged, veins prominent against the tanned skin. "You Vraxian folks always send a pretty girl to do the dirty work, or am I just lucky?" Kavra choked on the tea. "I am a high commander of the Dominion fleet. I am not a girl. I have glassed continents." "Sure you have," Dennis drawled, his eyes dropping to look her up and down, Oswani, lingering on the curve of her hip plating. It wasn't a lecherous look. It was an appraisal. Like he was checking the structural integrity of a fence post. "But right now, you're standing on my porch, drinking my tea, and you haven't shot my dog yet. So I figure you're mostly bark." Baxter let out a sleepy belch from the yard. "The beast is a biological weapon," Kavra insisted, though her resolve was melting in the heat of his presence. "It will grow. It will hunger. It will consume this world." "He's sick, Kavra," Dennis said, his voice dropping the playful edge. He sounded suddenly tired, ancient. "He's not eating the world. He's barely eating the synthetic chow I make him. He's dying. I'm just trying to make him comfortable." Kavra looked at the monster. The neon stripes were dimming again. The beast's breathing was ragged. "If he is dying," she said softly, "then I must confirm it. If I scan him and confirm terminal organ failure, I can call off the strike." Dennis studied her for a long moment. His amber eyes, darker than hers, like polished wood, seemed to weigh her soul. "All right," he said, "but you move slow, and you let me handle the head. You scare him." "I scare him?" Kavra asked incredulously. Dennis smirked. "You scare everybody, Commander. That's your job, ain't it?" The barn was a cavernous structure of corrugated metal and reinforced plasteel, smelling of dry hay, hydraulic fluid, and the pungent copper scent of the beast. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light slicing through the gaps in the roof. Dennis led Baxter inside, guiding the massive creature with nothing more than a hand on its flank and a series of low clicks and whistles. The beast collapsed onto a massive pile of straw and thermal blankets in the center of the bay, letting out a groan of relief. Kavra activated her wrist-mounted bioscanner. The holographic display flickered to life, casting a blue glow over the dim interior. "I need to access the ventral thoracic cavity," Kavra said, stepping closer. "The primary heart is located beneath the sternum plate." "Right here," Dennis said. He patted a spot just behind the creature's massive foreleg. "Come on in. Watch the claws." Kavra approached. Up close, the World Eater was overwhelming. The heat radiating off it was like a furnace. The claws on its feet were the size of scythes, capable of gutting a tank. She hesitated. Every survival instinct she had was screaming at her to retreat to orbit and nuke the site. Dennis noticed her hesitation. He didn't mock her. He stepped in close, placing his body between her and the beast's head. "I got him," he murmured. He reached back with one hand without looking and found her arm. He gripped her forearm, his fingers wrapping around the armor plating. Even through the composite material, she felt the pressure. "Step in. He knows you're with me?" "With me." The phrase hung in the air. Kavra stepped into the personal space of the monster and the man. She was sandwiched between the biological heat of the beast and the radiant animal warmth of Dennis. She could smell him clearly now, sweat, Old Spice, and the faint, sweet scent of the tea. It was intoxicating. She raised her scanner, her hand trembling slightly. Not from fear, from proximity. "Scanning," she whispered. The scanner hummed. Baxter shifted, his skin rippling. A low growl built in his throat, a vibration that rattled Kavra's teeth. "Easy," Dennis soothed. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead against the beast's coarse neck. His other hand, the one not holding Kavra, began to scratch deep into the thick ruff of hair at the creature's crest. "Just a doctor, buddy. Just a checkup." Kavra watched Dennis's face. His eyes were closed, his expression one of intense focus and empathy. He wasn't dominating the beast with force, he was anchoring it. He was absorbing its fear into himself. "Heart rate is irregular," Kavra noted, forcing herself to focus on the data stream. "Toxin levels in the blood are critical. He is suffering from fuel starvation." "Fuel?" Dennis opened his eyes. They were inches from hers. "He eats meat, or he's supposed to." "No," Kavra said, lowering her arm. The data stream collapsed. World Eaters are bioengineered refiners. They consume biomass to produce a hyperdense metabolic fuel. Without a specific catalyst enzyme, they cannot digest what they eat. He is starving to death with a full stomach. Dennis looked at the beast, pain visible in his expression. Poor bastard. Can we fix it? The catalyst is synthetic, Vraxian military supply only. You got some? On my ship, in orbit. Dennis turned his body fully toward her. The space between them was non-existent. His chest brushed against her breastplate. He looked down at her, and the intensity of his gaze made her breath hitch. He wasn't looking at a commander. He was looking at a solution. Call it down, he said. It wasn't a request. I cannot, Kavra said, her voice breathy. Protocol dictates that if the beast is dying, nature must take its course. My orders are extermination or observation, not aid. Dennis took a step closer, forcing her to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. He raised a hand, and with a boldness that stopped her twin hearts, brushed a stray lock of her hair away from her horn. His thumb grazed the sensitive skin at the base of the obsidian protrusion. A jolt of pleasure, sharp and electric, shot down her spine. Her tail whipped involuntarily, wrapping around his leg. Protocol, Dennis murmured, his voice rough. You flew halfway across the galaxy to kill a sick animal, Kavra. You really gonna let him die because of paperwork? He was manipulating her. She knew it. He was using his physical presence, his size, his bewildering gentleness to dismantle her defenses, and it was working. She wanted to please him. She wanted to see that approval in his dark eyes. If I call in a supply drop, she whispered, Command will know I am deviating from the mission parameters. They will be suspicious. Let him be suspicious, Dennis said. His hand cupped her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. His skin was rough, calloused, scratching against her smooth, violet flesh in a way that made her knees weak. You're the High Commander. You tell him you need to sedate the target for study. He leaned in, his mouth inches from her ear. Be the monster Tamer, Kavra. She shuddered. The vibration of his voice in her ear was more potent than any weapon she had ever faced. Fine, she gasped, stepping back, breaking the contact before she did something unprofessional, like rip his clothes off in a barn full of straw. I will request the enzyme. But if Baxter attacks, he won't, Dennis said, a slow, triumphant grin spreading across his face. He likes you. I can tell. How? Dennis pointed at her feet. Kavra looked down. Baxter's long, prehensile tail had wrapped around her ankle, resting there gently. He's a good judge of character, Dennis said softly. Usually. Kavra activated her comms unit, her hands shaking. She keyed in the request for the enzyme package. She felt like she was crossing a Rubicon. She was aiding a planetary threat. She was conspiring with a primitive. But as she looked up and saw Dennis scratching the massive beast behind the ears, the muscles in his back shifting under his shirt, she knew she would burn the whole fleet down if he asked her to. Request sent? She said. Good, Dennis said. He walked over to a workbench and picked up a heavy wrench. Now, while we wait, you can help me fix the tractor. Unless that's against protocol too? Kavra unlatched her helmet and pulled it off, shaking out her long violet hair. She placed the helmet on a hay bale. I am an engineer by training, she said, rolling her shoulders. Show me the machine. Dennis watched her, his eyes darkening as the armor at her neck retracted, revealing the vulnerable slope of her throat. Yes, ma'am, he said. The tractor roared to life, a belch of black smoke erupting from the vertical exhaust stack before settling into a rhythmic, powerful idle. Dennis wiped his hands on a rag, a grin splitting his beard. There, he shouted over the engine's thrum. Fuel injector was clogged. Told you she just needed to clear her throat. Kavra stood on the other side of the engine block, her sleeves rolled up, revealing smooth violet forearms smeared with grease. She held a sonic wrench with a natural grace that surprised him. For a woman who commanded starships, she had an intuitive understanding of torque and pressure. Primitive combustion, Kavra noted, though her tone lacked its usual bite. She looked at the vibrating machine, then up at him. Her amber eyes were bright, the pupils widening slightly. But effective. It has torque. Torque is all that matters when you're pulling a plow through bedrock, Dennis said. He stepped closer, the heat of the engine between them, but the heat of her gaze hotter. He reached out and thumbed a smudge of oil from her cheek. She didn't flinch. She leaned into it. The air between them grew heavy, charged with the static of unsaid things. The suns were setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the farm. It was a moment of perfect domestic peace. Then, Kavra's earpiece shrieked. She winced, her hand flying to her ear. The golden bioluminescence on her collarbone flared violently, turning from a warm amber to a harsh, warning red. "Admiral?" she snapped, her voice shifting instantly back to command frequency. "Status of the supply drop? The subject is stable. I require the—" "Cancel request." Admiral Vorak's voice was cold, audible even to Dennis in the quiet evening. "Bioscans indicate the human has established a level 5 psionic bond with the Alpha. He is not a farmer, Commander. He is a hive mind node. We cannot allow him to build a biological army." Kavra froze. "Admiral, that is incorrect. He is—" "You are compromised." Vorak cut her off. "Your heart rate and pheromone output indicate sympathy with the enemy. Protocol 9 is in effect. Sterilization." Kavra's blood ran cold. She looked up at the sky. Above the gathering clouds, a new star had appeared. Bright, white, and growing rapidly. "Dennis!" she screamed, the sound tearing from her throat. "Kinetic strike! Run!" She didn't wait. She lunged for him, intending to shove him, to knock him away from the blast zone. But Dennis moved with a speed that defied his bulk. He didn't look at the sky. He looked at her terror and reacted. He grabbed her by the waist, lifting her feet off the ground and sprinted. "The cellar!" he roared. The air around them began to ionize. The hair on Dennis's arms stood up. A high-pitched whine, like the galaxy tearing open, descended from the heavens. It was a tungsten rod, a kinetic bombardment weapon. No explosives, just pure physics. A telephone pole made of dense metal dropped from orbit at Mach 10. They hit the storm doors. Dennis kicked them open, threw Kavra into the darkness, and dove in after her. He slammed the heavy steel doors shut and spun the locking wheel just as the world ended. The impact didn't make a sound, not at first. It was a physical blow. The earth jumped. The concrete walls of the cellar buckled inward. Dennis wrapped his arms around Kavra, pulling her into the deepest corner, curling his massive frame around hers like a shield. Then came the noise. A roar that vibrated the fluid in their ears, a sound so loud it was felt rather than heard. Dust exploded from the ceiling. The lights shattered. They were buried in the dark, the ground shaking violently as the shockwave pulverized the farmhouse above them. Silence returned slowly, ringing in Kavra's ears like a dying siren. The air in the cellar was thick with concrete dust and the smell of ionized air. No, not ionized air. The smell of pulverized rock and electrical fire. "You okay?" Dennis's voice was a rumble against her back. He was heavy, his weight pinning her to the cold floor, but it was a comforting weight. Kavra tried to move, and agony lanced through her side. "My suit," she gasped. "Coolant line ruptured." A hiss filled the small space. The kinetic enforcer armor, designed to withstand vacuum, had cracked under the pressure of the human gripping her and the shockwave slamming them against the wall. Liquid nitrogen-based coolant was leaking directly onto her skin. "Get it off," Dennis commanded. He rolled off her, fumbling in the dark. A moment later, a beam of light cut the gloom, an emergency lantern. He shone it on her. Kavra hissed, her eyes squeezing shut. The coolant was reacting with her Vraxian physiology. It wasn't just a chemical burn, it was a neurotrigger. In the Dominion, this was known as the white fever. Intense pain followed by a primal berserker state. "Don't touch me!" she snarled, her voice distorting, deepening into a growl. Her claws extended fully, scratching deep grooves into the concrete floor. I will kill you." "No, you won't," Dennis said. He sounded calm, terrifyingly calm. He moved toward her. Kavra's vision swam in red. She saw him not as a man, but as a threat, a target. She lunged, her hand swiping for his throat. He caught her wrist. His grip was iron. He didn't strike back, he didn't yell. He used her own momentum to spin her around, slamming her chest against the cool wall of the cellar. He pinned her there, his hips pressing into her lower back, his chest covering hers. He secured both her wrists in one massive hand against the wall. "Easy, girl," he crooned, his mouth right at her ear. The vibration of his chest against her spine sent confusing signals through her panic. "It's just the fever, ride it out." "Release me!" she screamed, thrashing against him. She was an elite. She could lift a transport skiff. But Dennis was dense. He was built of gravity and stubbornness. He absorbed her struggles, shifting his weight to counter every buck and twist. "I can't do that, Kavra," he said. "You're hurt. And you're going to hurt yourself if I let go." She snapped her head back, trying to bite him. He anticipated it, pressing his cheek against the side of her head, immobilizing her neck with gentle, unyielding pressure. "Shh," he whispered, a long, low sound that seemed to bypass her brain and vibrate her bones. "I got you. You're safe. I'm not going to let the bad chemicals win." It was the same tone he used on Baxter. The realization cut through her delirium. She was the beast now. She was the dangerous thing that needed taming. The humiliation clashed with a searing white-hot arousal. To be held this effortlessly. To be contained. For a high commander who carried the weight of fleet logistics and planetary exterminations, the sensation of absolute helplessness was a drug. Her thrashing slowed. Her breathing came in ragged gasps. The burning on her side was intense, but the heat of his body was grounding her. "That's it," he murmured, sensing her surrender. "That's it. Just breathe." The lantern flickered, casting long, dancing shadows against the cracked concrete walls. The air was cooling rapidly as the cellar's ventilation kicked in, cycling out the dust. Kavra lay on a cot Dennis had unfolded. She was shivering, stripped down to her underlayer, a thin black mesh that left little to the imagination. Her armor lay in a pile in the corner, hissing faintly as the last of the coolant evaporated. Dennis sat on a crate beside her, a bowl of warm water and a clean rag in his hands. He looked weary. Dust coated his beard and hair, making him look like a statue carved from the earth itself. "This is gonna sting," he said softly. He wrung out the rag. He didn't ask for permission. The time for that had passed. He pressed the warm, damp cloth against the angry purple burn on her ribs. Kavra sucked in a breath through her teeth, her back arching off the cot. Her hand shot out, gripping his thigh. "Steady," Dennis murmured. He didn't pull away from her clawed grip, even as her nails dug into his jeans. He continued to wipe the chemical residue from her skin with methodical, rhythmic strokes. "Gotta get it all off or it keeps burning." Kavra watched him. Her fever had broken, leaving her weak and fluid. She felt exposed, not just physically, but spiritually. He had seen her lose control. He had physically dominated her, and now he was washing her like a prize mare. "Why?" she whispered, her voice raspy. "Why save me? The fleet, they tried to kill you." Dennis rinsed the rag, the water turning slightly violet from her surface toxins. "You ain't the fleet, Kavra. You're just a woman doing a job she didn't ask for." He looked at her then. His eyes traveled over her body, the long lines of her legs, the flare of her hips, the bioluminescent markings that were now pulsing a soft, inviting gold. He didn't hide his desire. It was there, raw and honest, but he kept it on a leash. "Besides," he added, a corner of his mouth lifting, "I need someone to help me explain to your boss why he owes me a new barn." Kavra let out a laugh that turned into a sob. She reached up, her hand trembling, and touched his face. She traced the line of his beard, the rough texture of his skin. "You are—" She struggled for the word in galactic common. "You are relentless." "I'm a farmer," Dennis said simply. He took her hand, kissing the palm. It was an intimate, possessive gesture. "We don't give up on a crop just because of a little bad weather." He stood up, towering over her in the cramped space. "Rest. I'm going to check the hatch. See if we're buried alive or just trapped." "Dennis," she said. He paused. "Do not leave me," she commanded, though it sounded like a plea. He looked back, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "I ain't going nowhere, Commander." I got a dying beast and a beautiful alien in my cellar. I'm exactly where I want to be. He turned away, but not before she saw the tension in his jaw. He wanted her. The realization made her heart hammer against her ribs, but he wouldn't take her while she was wounded. He had a code, a frustrating, primitive, incredibly attractive code. She watched his back as he moved to the ladder. The muscles shifted under his shirt. She realized then that the Admiral was right. He had built an army. He had recruited her, and she would tear the sky down if he asked her to. The hydraulic groan of the cellar doors was the loudest sound in the universe. Dennis strained against the steel wheel, the muscles of his back bunching under his sweat-stained shirt as he fought the weight of the rubble piled above them. With a final, grinding screech, the hatch gave way, spilling a cascade of pulverized concrete and ash into the sanctuary below. "Stay close," Dennis coughed, waving away the dust. He climbed the ladder first, emerging into a nightmare. The farm was gone. The golden sea of wheat was now a scorched black scar across the landscape. The farmhouse was a crater. The only light came from the fires burning in the twisted skeleton of the barn and the harsh, crimson searchlights cutting through the smoke. "Hunter-killers," Kavra hissed from behind him. She pulled herself up, wincing as her bruised ribs protested. She felt naked without her armor, stripped of the kinetic plating that had defined her existence for cycles. She was just flesh and bone against machines designed to depopulate cities. "Dennis, we have no weapons. My carbine was in the house." "We ain't helpless," Dennis grunted. He moved toward the ruins of the tool shed, kicking aside a burning beam. He reached into a metal lockbox that had survived the blast and pulled out an old heavy-caliber projectile rifle, a relic by galactic standards, but a cannon by any other name. He didn't keep it. He turned and pressed it into Kavra's hands. "You're the marksman," he said, his eyes locking onto hers. "Don't miss." "You are giving me the weapon?" Kavra stared at the gun, then at him. "You are defenseless." "I got the tractor," Dennis said, grabbing a 4-foot iron pry bar from the rubble. "And I got the dog." He turned to the smoldering remains of the barn and let out a piercing, 2-note whistle. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then, the debris pile exploded outward. Baxter erupted from the wreckage like a demon unchained. He was no longer the sluggish, dying animal Kavra had scanned. The Vraxian enzyme had done its work. The bioluminescent stripes along his flanks were blinding, pulsing with a nuclear neon green intensity that lit up the smoke. He roared, a sound that shook the soot from the air, and his massive jaws snapped with the force of a hydraulic press. 3 hunter-killer droids, hovering sleeks of chrome and red sensors, swiveled toward the noise. "Get him, boy!" Dennis yelled, pointing with the pry bar. Baxter charged. The ground trembled. "Protect the house!" Dennis roared, sprinting after the beast. Kavra felt a surge of adrenaline that had nothing to do with fear. It was belonging. He wasn't commanding her. He was trusting her. She racked the slide of the projectile rifle, the mechanical clack-clack feeling satisfyingly heavy. She brought the stock to her shoulder, took a breath, and exhaled. She was part of the pack. The wheat field became a kill box. Baxter was a blur of violence. He slammed into the first droid, his mass alone crumbling its chassis. He didn't bite it, he crushed it, pinning it to the earth and tearing its sensor array out with a savage twist of his neck. Kavra tracked the second droid. It was hovering high, charging a plasma lance aimed at Baxter's exposed flank. She led the target, compensating for the wind and the smoke. Crack. The rifle kicked hard against her shoulder. The bullet, a solid slug of lead, punched through the droid's anti-grav drive. It spun wildly, crashing into the burning crops. "Two down!" she shouted. "Behind you!" Dennis's voice cut through the chaos. Kavra spun, but she was too slow. A third droid had flanked them, emerging from the smoke silently. It raised a manipulator arm, a buzzsaw whirring to life, inches from her face. Before it could strike, a dark shape collided with it. Dennis. He didn't have a kinetic shield. He didn't have power armor. He hit the machine with the raw, terrifying force of a human body moving at terminal velocity. The impact knocked the droid back, but it didn't fall. It righted itself, its servos whining, and grabbed Dennis by the throat. Kavra screamed, raising her rifle, but she couldn't fire. Dennis was in the way. "Get off my land!" Dennis snarled. Kavra watched, her amber eyes going wide, as the impossible happened. Dennis didn't claw at the hand choking him. He dropped his pry bar and grabbed the droid's manipulator arm with both hands. He planted his feet in the ash. His biceps swelled, the veins popping like ropes under his skin. He roared, a primal, guttural sound that rivaled Baxter's. With a sickening screech of tearing metal, Dennis ripped the droid's arm out of its socket. Sparks showered over him. The droid faltered, its balance compromised. Dennis didn't stop. He swung the severed metal limb like a club, smashing it into the droid's optical sensor with a clang that rang like a church bell. The machine collapsed, twitching. Dennis stood over the wreckage, chest heaving, sparks dying in his beard. He looked like a god of war forged from dirt and iron. Kavra lowered her rifle. Her breath came in shallow gasps. She had seen Vraxian elites lift heavy loads with assist suits. She had never, in all her cycles, seen a biological being disassemble a combat droid with rage alone. The heat pooling in her belly was sudden and overwhelming. It wasn't just admiration, it was a biological imperative. He was the strongest thing on this planet. Dennis looked at her, wiping oil and droid fluid from his face. He grinned, teeth white in the gloom. "You okay? Slick?" Kavra swallowed hard. "I am functional." "Good," Dennis said, retrieving his pry bar. "'Cause the neighbors are waking up." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the crackle of fires and Baxter's heavy panting. The beast limped over to Dennis, nudging his hand. Dennis absently scratched behind the massive creature's ear, his eyes fixed on the sky. The clouds parted. A holographic projection beam stabbed down from the flagship in orbit, manifesting a shimmering, blue giant in the center of the cratered yard. Admiral Vorak. "Assessment!" The Admiral's voice boomed, distorted by the atmosphere. "Target persists. Preparing secondary kinetic volley. Total saturation." Kavra stepped forward, limping slightly. She threw the rifle down. "Admiral, the target is neutralized. The human is a variable we cannot calculate," Vorak interrupted. "He survives bombardment. He disassembles tech. He commands monsters. He is too dangerous to live." "Hey!" Dennis stepped into the projection field. He looked minuscule next to the hologram, but his posture suggested he was the one looking down. "You owe me a new roof, Vorak," the Admiral sneered. "You are in no position to negotiate, Primitive. You have 10 seconds to make peace with your deity. And you have 10 seconds to listen before I burn your gas station down," Dennis said calmly. Vorak paused. "Explain." Dennis patted Baxter's flank. The beast's stripes were pulsing a steady, rich neon green. "Your scans picked up the fuel starvation, right? But you didn't ask what fuel. This big guy here? He ain't just a monster. He's a walking refinery. His gut bacteria breaks down biomass into hypercombustion plasma, the stuff your FTL drives run on." Kavra looked at Dennis, stunned. "Dennis? Is that true? Why do you think I feed him charcoal and scrap metal?" Dennis winked at her. He looked back at the hologram. "He was dying because he was full, Admiral. He needed to vent. And now that he's healthy, he's producing enough juice to power your fleet for a cycle. Or..." Dennis pulled a flare from his pocket and cracked it. The red flame hissed. He held it near Baxter's glowing flank. "Or I can spook him. He vents the plasma. I drop this flare, and the resulting explosion cracks this moon in half and takes your flagship with it." It was a bluff, mostly. The Admiral stared. The logic processors on the ship would be running the simulations. If the beast was indeed a refinery, the explosion yield would be catastrophic. "You are bluffing," Vorak said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Try me," Dennis said. His voice was cold, hard, and absolutely devoid of fear. "I'm a farmer, Admiral. We know how to do controlled burns, but if you push me, I'll let the whole field go up." The standoff stretched for an eternity. Kavra held her breath. "Stand down," Vorak finally said. The hologram flickered. Designate the site as a protected resource zone. Commander Kavra? Sir? Kavra straightened. You remain as liaison. Secure the asset. Ensure production continues. Understood, Kavra said. The beam cut out. The red lights in the sky turned from angry crimson to a neutral amber, then faded as the fleet moved to a holding pattern. Dennis blew out the flare and tossed it aside. He sagged, the adrenaline finally leaving him. He leaned against Baxter, sliding down until he was sitting in the ash. Man, he exhaled. I hate politics. 3 weeks later, the air on Tartarus IV smelled of fresh lumber and wet sealant. The new barn was half raised, a sturdy skeleton of timber standing proud against the setting sun. The crater in the yard had been filled, and green shoots of genetically modified wheat were already pushing through the scarred earth. Kavra sat on the newly rebuilt porch steps, watching the work. She wasn't wearing armor. She wore a pair of Dennis's spare canvas trousers, rolled up at the cuffs, and a simple white shirt tied at her waist. Her feet were bare. Her violet skin looked vibrant against the white fabric, her horns gleaming in the twilight. She watched Dennis hammer a crossbeam into place. He was shirtless, his back glistening with sweat, the scars of his life visible map lines of his history. He worked with a rhythm that was hypnotic: drive, swing, impact. Baxter lay in the shade of the porch, chewing contentedly on a compressed block of scrap titanium the fleet had dropped off as supplies. The galaxy had started calling him the Monster Tamer. The feeds were full of it. The human who stared down a fleet and made a world-eater heel. They said he was a psionic warlord. They said he was a genetic experiment. Kavra knew the truth. He wiped his forehead and jumped down from the scaffolding, landing with a heavy thud. He walked over to the water pump, splashing his face and neck. He shook his head like a dog, sending droplets flying. He looked up and saw her watching him. He froze. The look in his eyes hadn't changed since the cellar. It was hungry, but patient. How's the structural integrity, liaison? He teased, grabbing a towel. Kavra stood up. She walked down the steps, the grass cool under her feet. She stopped in front of him. She didn't look like a commander anymore. She looked like a woman who had found her home. The structure is sound, she said. She reached out, her claws retracted, her fingers tracing the line of muscle from his shoulder to his chest. But the workforce is distracting. Dennis dropped the towel. He stepped closer, invading her space, wrapping his large, rough hands around her waist. He pulled her flush against him. The heat of him was still startling, a constant furnace that she craved every night. Distracting, huh? He murmured, tilting his head down. You gonna report me to the Admiral? I resigned my commission this morning, Kavra whispered. Dennis stopped. You what? I told them the asset requires full-time supervision, round the clock. She rose on her toes, her amber eyes searching his. I told them the monster Tamer needed a keeper. Dennis let out a low laugh, a sound that vibrated against her chest. Is that right? You think you can handle the job? I have subdued star systems, Dennis, she purred, her tail curling around his leg, pulling him tighter. I think I can handle one farmer. Prove it, he challenged. Kavra didn't hesitate. She grabbed the front of his shirt. No, he wasn't wearing one. She grabbed the back of his neck, her fingers tangling in his hair, and pulled his mouth down to hers. The kiss was like the man, rough, tasting of salt and earth, and overwhelmingly alive. He groaned, lifting her off the ground as easily as he lifted a hay bale. Kavra wrapped her legs around his waist, burying her face in the crook of his neck, inhaling the scent of him. Baxter looked up from his titanium chew toy, let out a short, approving huff, and went back to eating. The galaxy could think whatever it wanted. The monsters were doing just fine.